Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin. I am Jason Podolin, your host of this podcast, and today you're here for episode 40, where we have on Mr. Ken Reid of Sportsnet fame up here in Canada. For you American listeners, that is kind of the equivalent to your ESPN down in the States, where they cover the highlights and the sports. And he's a co-anchor with Ivanka Osmak up here, and well liked by the Canadian community. Ken does a great job on air. He's also an author, and he's also a massive hockey fan. And when Ken Reid called me and asked if I'd like to be a part of his new book called One to Remember, I wasn't sure what to say. Ken wanted to tell the stories of various players who scored a grand total of one NHL goal in their careers. I like the idea, but a piece of me didn't want to go down that road. And, telling my story about my one goal would require me to admit there should have been more, and perhaps have to explain why I underachieved. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go there, because for me, my one goal had always been an example of a failure to have the career I dreamed of, failure to step into my potential as a player, failure to be able to figure out how to become an NHL regular. But working on the book with Ken helped me to change that a little bit. And he made me recognize actually what a huge accomplishment one goal is. Scoring a goal in the NHL has only been done by 5,000 other humans ever. So regardless of what could have been, might have been, or should have been for me, I did score a goal in the greatest league in the world. And that goal represents pints of blood, buckets of sweat, and pools of tears that were all donated in its pursuit. Countless hours on buses, at the rink, and riding the bike, invested in the chase for more. But for some of us, there was only one. And that one to remember, as Ken would say, can never be taken away from us. So thank you, Ken, for reminding me that my one goal against Ron Hextall and the Philadelphia Flyers is something to be proud of, not something for me to look at with embarrassment. So I'll try to remind myself of that the next time I see my goal plaque, and I should hold my head a little higher and smile a little more gratefully, because it does represent something that is very, very special. So this is a great conversation with one of the nicest guys in the game. Ken Reid is a grinder, a professional, and he knows how to treat people. He also knows how to tell a pretty damn good story, and you get a lot of them here on this episode. There are lots of parallels that we can take from Ken's journey to the mountaintop too. His intention, his coachability, his accountability, and his practice. You want to be good at something? Grab those 4 traits with both hands, and I like your chances. There's a lot in this interview. It was a great time. He's a guy that you feel like you're sitting across the table from and having a beer with. And I hope you get that feel with this conversation. And it's also the way Ken says he likes to write his books. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my interview with Mr. Ken Reid. All right, here we are back for episode 40 of Up My Hockey. Today we have on, well, you are a hockey player, but you're not a professional hockey player.
No.
And you are the first professional anchor, or is broadcaster even the right word to use? Could I use that? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
First broadcaster to be on the show, Mr. Ken Reid. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I am the furthest thing from a professional hockey player. I dreamed of it, but you know what? Not everybody can make a reality like you did. I was no pro, buddy.
That's funny. Well, I want to get into that, even your Genesis story, and the connection between wanting to play hockey potentially and chatting about it, or talking about it, or broadcasting it. Maybe a straight line. Is that how it went? Like, did you want to be the player, realized you couldn't, and this was kind of the next best thing?
That's exactly it. Like, it's funny, a lot of guys in our business are that. We're all pretty much wannabe players. I mean, I don't know many guys in sports media who went into it as their first choice in life. You know, when you're a kid, I think you probably dream about being the player first, and then you realize, okay, I'm not going to make it. How do I stay involved in this world? How do I eke into this world and be a part of this toy department of life?
Hmm.
So honestly, Jason, for me, I'll never forget. I got cut. I think it was from the novice one team in Pictou when I was maybe 8 or 9, and I was bummed because I realized at that very young age, oh my goodness, I mean, I'm not going to make the NHL if I can't make the novice one team in Pictou, town of 5,000. How can I make the NHL? And so a lot of kids keep the dream going, you know, till they're 14, 15. For me, at 8, it was over, and I was devastated. So I went home, and like I don't know if I was crying in my Pepsi or what with my dad, but there was a game on, and I think it was an Expos game, so it must have been this must have happened in like late September or something, somewhere around that. I don't even know what I was doing playing hockey then, but there was a game on, and Dad said, "Well, the guys who talk about the games, they get to go to all the games for free." And boom, the light bulb literally went on, and I was like, "Oh my god, they do." And I remember that's what I wanted to do. And there was times when I said, "Okay, maybe I'll be a physiotherapist," because my dad was a doctor. When you're a doctor's kid, you want to like keep the medical dream going a bit, but wasn't going to happen. So I wanted to be a broadcaster from the youngest of age. So when I watched Hockey Night in Canada, I love the players and I love the broadcasters just as much. So like Bob Cole, I love Wayne Gretzky. I'm from the Gretzky school. I'm sure you are too. We're the same age pretty much. And I love Bob Cole just as much, and Dick Irvin just as much, and Danny Galvin just as much. And I just absorbed everything about the game. And just because I knew I couldn't make the National Hockey League, that did not lessen my love of the game. But I found myself going, okay, there's a different way to get into the games for free. I won't be able to play, but maybe we can do a game for free. And I actually
Right.
I've gotten into lots of games for free because I'm a member of the media. So that's how it worked out.
That is so wild. My father, I just actually did a podcast. I'm actually the guest on my most recent one, 39,
Yeah.
and it was for a podcast that never went live that I did an interview for, and I told the story of my dad taking me to the '85 All-Star game in Calgary. I believe it was '85.
Oh, dude, that's amazing.
Yeah, and so it was my birthday present, and so my dad is a little bit of a maverick himself and a cowboy, and he had this idea that he was going to print off a homemade press pass for us, and that was his
Amazing.
idea to get into the dressing room. So he had a lanyard, right? He printed press on it, like laminated the thing. He brought this new camera with him, like to make him look all
Yeah,
sophisticated,
yeah.
and like, and so we waited there, right? And that was back in '85. There, I mean, we didn't know, and he didn't know like what really
Right.
a press pass was or wasn't, but like we stood there with all the other reporters. He had the pass, walked right in. I stuck on his hip. I got into both dressing rooms. It was
Amazing.
amazing. It was
See,
amazing.
that is awesome. I love that because back in the day, even in my earliest NHL press passes, they're little laminate things. Right now, it's got your
Yeah,
ID, but back then, dude,
yeah,
that like they would be signatures with hands and stuff. That is
yeah.
amazing. See, I respect your dad. My brother's like that. If he wants to go into something, he just goes. He walked into the premiere of Inglorious Bastards here in Toronto. There's a massive line, and him and his buddy just it's like if you look like you belong,
Yeah,
you can get in. That is, I mean,
I know.
my God, that is like you got Messier, Coffee, Gretzky, you got everybody there, eh?
Lemieux, like Eiserman.
Wow. Oh my
It was
God.
crazy, man. It was nuts. And I mean, and it was the glory days, right? Like 9-year-old kid, like that's like when the Mecca
Yeah,
is the Mecca, right? Like the
yeah,
players are huge and you're the biggest fan in the world. And
right.
so yeah, that was a super special time for me. And yeah,
That's what Ken Dryden says. You'll never see the game like you see it as a 10-year-old. I try to keep seeing the game with my 10-year-old eyes so I can realize how special it is. But that's dad of the decade category. It's funny. I met Gretzky that first time in '85 as well, and it was same kind of deal. Like I'm sure you're the only kid in there, right, running around.
yeah, but I remember I wasn't
Yeah,
really watching for him, but I assume.
yeah. So I met Gretzky. My brother and I, the Oilers played the Sabres in an exhibition game in Halifax, because the Oilers' old farm team was the Nova Scotia Oilers in Halifax. And after the game, Moosehead Breweries had a like a little reception for the Oilers and all the VIP old men who drink beer. And my mother, she's like your dad. She'll do anything for her kids. And she was friends with a guy named Donnie Morrison, and he got my brother and I. in with the Edmonton Oilers. So we're running around like kids in a candy store with only 2 kids in there. So that's hilarious. You did the same thing, and
Yeah, it's so
I
fun.
was 11, or just turning.
Yeah.
No, it's just turning 11. So there you go.
Doesn't get any better.
Oh,
I got to
yeah.
go back to first of all, shout out to Pictou. Like, I'm sure you don't know, but I've been to Pictou County, if you can believe that.
Really? Yeah. What's your connection? There's the old Pictou Mariners Junior C team. Nova Scotia
There you
champs
go. Unbelievable.
4 years
Yeah,
in a row.
I dated a girl whose family was from there, the Chisholms. So
You
I think
told
they're
me
still
that.
there.
You
Yeah.
told me that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was
Well,
down there. Unbelievable place. Fell in love with the Maritimes. I really
oh,
do.
yeah.
Like, I mean, I love my time in Newfoundland too, and the
Yeah.
people in Nova Scotia were awesome. So it's
Yeah.
cool that we have that connection there back to
Well,
Pictou.
I wonder if that she was related to Sandy Chisholm, who was a defenseman. I could never be a weatherman. Who was a defenseman on the Pictou Mariners Junior C team. He had a big Cooper helmet. So
Interesting.
that's
We'll
like
have to check that out.
1983. Yeah.
Yeah, and going back to your story, that's wild though, as an 8-year-old or whatever you said in novice, to have that type of, I don't know, awareness, maybe to be that
Yeah.
wise, to
Yeah.
say this isn't just for me. Like that's kind
Yeah.
of nuts.
I kept playing, and I loved playing, and I played as hard as I could. And it's funny, a lot of guys I talk to, and I'm sure you've heard this. They'll say, "Get everything out of the game that you can as a player," and I did. And for me, it was high school hockey and midget C, and then
Yeah,
intramural. But
yeah,
I loved it. Like, just because I knew I wasn't going to make the NHL, didn't lessen my drive. And it's so sad too, because I had this incredible drive, but I wasn't that good. My brother was really good. He played rep hockey, and he played with a bunch of guys who went to the show, but he just didn't have the drive. So we always said, if we could combine forces, we'd maybe have like a tier 2 junior A player,
that's
that kind of
awesome.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, that whole. I mean, I've taken that stance now when I'm talking to people, and people are, older guys are asking for advice. Like, should I go play pro? I mean, I'm only getting some in the East Coast League or whatever the case may be. And it's like, man, there's so much life after hockey that
Yeah.
you're going to have,
Hmm.
and you can really only play for a certain amount of time. There is a time frame there that you can be a professional player or any type of player. So why not just go with it? Like I've sort of shifted from that. I mean, I left the game early from
Yeah.
concussions and stuff, and I was like, maybe there's more life, but I don't know. At 44 now and looking back, boy, that's a pretty special spot to be in.
I can imagine. I mean, I had a buddy. He came out of Acadia, and then he went and played for the Lubbock Cotton Kings. And he's like, I don't know if I'm going to go back next year. And he played another year. I think he played a little in Quad City or something like that. And I said, milk it, man. You're 23. When I was 23, I didn't know what the heck was going on. So just do it for a year or two, and at least you'll have the stories. But what's also funny is, I mean, doing these books and talking to older players, and I do a lot of alumni events with like guys like your buddy Dennis Marouk and stuff like that. And there is so much life after hockey. And when you and I think back to our 20s, right? It's a great time, but it's such a small part of your life. And that is usually, if a guy's playing pro, it's usually in his 20s into his early 30s. So that's what, 10, 12 years of your life, if you're lucky to play that long. And then when you're 55, you've lived 20 plus years outside of the game. And I'm sure some guys look back and go, geez, it either seems like a lifetime ago, or it seems like it's 2 seconds ago. But for me, like, I was thinking last night, you know, um, when I was a kid, right? And like, let's say I graduated high school in 1992. You look at pictures of people on the wall from 1982, and they look ancient.
Yeah.
But as you get older, those 10 years get smaller, right? Because your life
Right.
gets longer. So now 10 years ago is 2010, and I probably got this shirt in 2010, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in 1990, I wouldn't wear a shirt from 1980, but just things just get smaller. So I'm sure looking back, that window gets smaller as you look back on it as a former pro. But when you're 22, it probably looks like, oh man, I don't want to sit and do this for 5 years in the minors or whatever. But I think it would be a pretty good time. But then again, I'm a pretty big hockey wannabe.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it, because I've never really met anyone that says, "Man, I wish I retired earlier."
Good point.
Like,
Yeah.
I've never heard a guy say that, right? Like, I wish I
Yeah.
was a dentist sooner, or I wish,
Yeah.
like, and obviously nothing against the dentist or being whatever people choose to do after hockey, but no one says, "Man, I wish I would have done this earlier." So it is, when you're in the moment, you have to be grateful for that, and it's hard to be grateful as a mid-20s and as a teen and everything else. What you're
Mhm.
going through,
It is.
but it is a real special place to be, and it's something that you just don't get back. There's no job like that. Closest thing I think is maybe a fireman, like
Yeah.
post
Yeah.
career, right? And a
Just
lot of
just
guys
because
get
of the
into it for that
camaraderie?
reason too.
Because of the camaraderie and stuff?
Yeah, because I mean, you have a team. You're in there. You got to depend on each other. There's downtime kind of between games where they're working out and telling stories, and then when it's
Yeah.
go time, it's battle time, and
Cool.
like it's a pretty good fraternity there. And well, it's not just men anymore either. There's a lot of women in the fire in that
Yeah.
workplace. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's funny.
I can understand why they attract a lot of hockey players into that sport. I mean,
I
not sport,
it
into that profession.
Yeah. It's funny, I got a friend, he's just like me, he was a hockey dreamer, right? Decent player. He, led our league in assists one year in the beer league because he would tell the ref second assist, so he ended up with, like, 0 goals, 28 second assists, but anyway, he's like me, he's immature goofball. So his gig is he's one of the guys on the team on Letterkenny. He plays Boomtown, and he's
Okay.
also a firefighter, so it works perfect because when he has to shoot, he just trades off days with the guys in the fire hall, and he gets all this time to go shoot Letterkenny or whatever other movie he's on. So
Oh,
yeah,
perfect.
he's like that too. But I mean, yeah, when I think back at how long life looked ahead of me in my 20s, and I see how a pro hockey player would probably look at the same thing. But I always found that, like, my brother's a stand-up comedian, and I always found that there's similarities between being a stand-up comedian, being in the media, and being in sports. Because as a comedian, you start small and pay your dues, and you work your way from club to club, hopefully to bigger theaters. Media, you start in a smaller market, work your way up, 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 with rare exceptions. Hockey, you'll start your way in juniors, work your way up minors, up, 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 up. You're paying the dues. The rare person hits the top right away in every profession. There's always going to be an Eddie Murphy who shows up on Saturday Night Live when he's 21. There's always going to be Sidney Crosby who shows up in the NHL when he's 18, 19 years old. There's always going to be a Kyle Bukauskas who shows up on Hockey Night in Canada when he's 20, 21. And then there's the rest of us. They're just grinding their way up. And I mean, I'm sure you have stories of when you're playing in the American League, and well, like TR and Linger having blow up furniture in Fredericton for like 6 months. Like, there's things you do that, and then when you get to the top, the NHL, or be it Sportsnet, or playing downtown Yuck Yucks for my brother, well, you kind of have nicer furniture and a stable house like the one I'm sitting in, as opposed to the apartments I rented when I was going across the country. So I've always seen similarities in that climb up to the top.
Right. That's a great segue into what I wanted to get into, which is you being the 18-year-old kid who decides, you know what, I actually think this is something that I want to do. You start idolizing some of these guys that are on TV and maybe
Yeah.
mimicking them and, calling the games, or whatever the case may be. What is that road look like for someone who wants to do that?
Yeah.
How did you know where to go? I wouldn't have a clue.
Well, it was crazy because I was an outgoing kid, but then by the time I got to be 12, 13, I became this like introvert, I guess is the word. I was shy. I basically was depressed from the time I was 13 on, anxiety, nervous about what people thought of me, which is kind of strange given that I wanted to say on a microphone to be a hockey announcer. But
Mhm.
I wanted to be a hockey announcer. And I didn't want to be a hockey announcer so that somebody could say, oh, that's Kenny, the hockey announcer. I just wanted to be a hockey announcer. So I was the guy that when I watched Hockey Night in Canada, sometimes I'd turn the volume down and do the play-by-play by myself. Um, had to figure out what to do, where to go for school. Went to UMaine, did the games there on the radio. Got out of school, had a journalism degree. So it's not behind me, but I have like the journalism degree. We can get into the ethics of journalism later and what's going on in 2020 with that if you'd like, but I don't know if you want to go there. So, and then you get out of school, right? I guess it would be akin to a 20-year-old getting out of major junior without a deal, right? But he still has that drive. He doesn't want to maybe go CIS. He wants to give the pros a go.
So you're
So
saying you're saying with the degree now, that's what you're equating to. So you got the degree, you
yeah,
went to journalism, you haven't
yeah,
been paid to do it yet. Is that
correct,
accurate? Okay.
correct. So I'm sitting on the side of the road. So what am I gonna do? So like everybody else after university, I want to go back home, screw off for the summer. So I do. And then September comes and dad says, okay, get out. What? Get out of the house. So I had to find a place with a couple buddies. And I desperately wanted to get in. I had to pay some bills. I was telemarketing. I was calling people. Have you read the Chronicle Herald lately? Well, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, I started volunteering. I inquire at the channel. There was two Channel 10s at the time in the Halifax area. There was one in Dartmouth, one in Halifax. The one in Dartmouth did the games for the Dartmouth Olin Exports of the Maritime Junior A Hockey League, which were run by Jim Bottomley, and they needed a play-by-play guy. So I showed up and I had experience. My tape was actually pretty good from college. So I get the job as the volunteer play-by-play guy. So I start doing the Maritime Junior A Hockey League games on Tuesday, and I'm telemarketing the rest of my time, just trying to make money. And in January of '97, this Channel 10 started a community news program once a week, and they had to hire 3 people for it. I was already in because I'd been volunteering, so they hired me at $8 an hour, 32 hours a week. But at the hockey games, you got free pizza delight, so that was huge. So I looked at it as, okay, I'm not going to get rich, but this is grad school for me. I'm getting paid to go to grad school because I'm going to get to do play by play. I'm doing news stories and sports stories in the communities. I'm shooting my own camera. I'm editing my own stuff. I'm getting to anchor. So you get your reps in, do that. And I loved play by play. I absolutely loved it. Some of my best memories in this business are doing, like a game 7, Maritime Junior A, triple overtime, Dartmouth Truro. It was awesome. And from there, I did that for 2 years, 2 months. Tried to crack the Halifax market, couldn't get in. I mean, when I was 22, dude, I looked like I was 14. And moved to Calgary, got a job as a part-time news writer on the morning show. I wrote news from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m., Monday to Friday, $10 an hour. So my salary went up. And then I did that for 3 months, got promoted to full-time writer, 8 months doing that, got promoted to videographer, the kind of guy that goes and shoots his own news stories. 8 months of that, got my break, got hired as the weekend sports guy. That's when I got the press pass, like your dad drew up, the Calgary Flames. So in Calgary, I went from weekend guy to weeknight guy, took a gig in Ottawa for 2 years, took a gig in Edmonton for 3 years. Then got engaged to a girl in Edmonton who's upstairs now. She's my wife. We're not engaged anymore. She took a job. She took a job in Toronto, and in the 2008, at the height of the recession, I quit my job as an anchor at CTV Edmonton and moved to Toronto with nothing. My dad thought I was insane. I was making good money. It's a recession, but I had to follow 2 things: the lady I loved and the goal that I had in mind. The goal for me was I wanted to be on a sports network. I didn't want to be doing 6 minutes of sports on the 6 o'clock news anymore, being told, okay, you got to cut 30 seconds out of your sportscast because we need another 30 seconds for weather. Right? I love doing local sports, but I wanted to be at a sports network. So that's what I did. So that was right before Christmas in 2008. I moved to Toronto, and God bless my brother who let my wife and I crash on his couch or best spare bedroom for 4 months while we got a place arranged to buy here in Toronto. So I've been in Toronto ever since.
That's wild. So 2 things with that whole the history there. Is that normal as far as you wanting to be in front of a camera doing sports, that you would start writing, that you would start in a back room somewhere and not in front of the camera?
At the time, it was, yes.
Yeah.
You had to work your way up. So when I broke into the media, I was lucky because there's local stations in Lethbridge. There's local stations doing sports in Swift Current. I mean, now there's no local sports in Toronto, right? There's no local sports in Calgary. When I was in Calgary, there was A Channel, CTV, Global. Shaw had a couple sports guys. So you can market hop, right? That's how you got raises. That's how you got street cred. That's how you got your reps. I feel bad for young broadcasters now because I don't know how they get their reps in because it's
Right.
different. There's not as many opportunities to get on camera. So yeah, so basically to break in, as Tim McAuliffe says, don't say no. You don't say no to anything. So I just weaseled my way into Channel 10, and then I weaseled my way into Calgary. And it's one of those things you have to make your intentions known, right? You have to go up to the news director when you're hired as a writer and say, hey, sir, I'd like to be on air one day. And they go, oh yeah, they kind of laugh. You go, no, I would. So you just get in front of a camera somehow. So when I was a videographer and there was 3 people in our sports department, if one of them went on vacation, the other 2 had to fill. So the other 2 had to end up working weekends, which they'd hate. So I went up to them, I'd said, why don't you let me do it? And they're absolutely. So then when it was time to hire a sports guy, I'd already done it 10 times. So, but yeah, most people start behind the camera. For me, I had to do news for a while, and I looked at that as a penance, as a payment. Like, okay, I got to cover town council. Literally, the circus is coming to town in Calgary, and I have to cover it. So be it. I did cover a nude stampede breakfast, which was actually quite a fun story.
Yeah.
So you just I mean, I think in hockey, nobody dreams of starting their career maybe in the East Coast League, but you got to do what you got to do. So you
Well, I like
grind
that.
away.
I like your word there, intention, because that's something that I definitely coach and I speak to a lot. And
Hmm.
I, I don't know if it's recognized as being as important as it is, and allowing those around you to know what your dreams and what your
Yeah,
desires are and where you want to get to. Uh, because just going and saying that, like you said, maybe he chuckled the first time, but when you're showing up there first thing in the morning and you tell him again the next week and you're
yeah,
doing the little things, like that guy becomes part of your dream,
he
and he
does.
knows he's becoming part of your dream. And yeah, I mean, I talk to hockey players about that too. It seems obvious, but even at the youth level, right? Or guys who want to get scholarships, go to D1, talk to the people that are around you and tell them who you want to be and where you want to go. And they'll help
Exactly.
you get there. I
They
promise you
will.
they will.
They will. At least they'll know you're interested. Like I tell all the young kids at work, they'll say, "Yeah, I want to be on air." I'm like, "Did you tell the boss?" Because the boss isn't going to come up to you and say, "Hey, you should be on TV." At least in hockey, you can show your skills off, right? But
Yeah.
if there's a scout and he might like the kid, but he thinks, "Oh God, he's going to go major junior." If he's scouting for college, maybe he doesn't give him that extra consideration. So yes, absolutely. I think no matter what line of work you're in, tell people your intentions, tell people what you want to do. And you're right. If someone sees you and they like you, they will do their best to help you. They'll. I'll never forget the first time I saw Kyle Bukauskas. He came into work and he's this young looking kid. He's 19. He's in a suit. I'm like, I'm gonna go talk to this dude. I went up to him. He's like, "Hello, Mr. Reid." I'm like, "That's Kenny." And he's like, "I'm Kyle. I went to school at Nate or at SAIT in Calgary, and I'm out from out BC. And I'd like to be on air one day." And I'm like, "Well, you're looking the part, buddy. You're doing it right." And I said, he told the bosses. He was 19 years old. He was so damn good, and he's still so damn good on Hockey Night in Canada. The boss was like, "I can't believe this, but I got to put a 19 or 20-year-old on my network." And he was so good. But he was so good because he knew what he wanted. He told people what he wanted. And importantly, he dressed for the job he wanted, not the job he had. Kyle played it perfectly, and he deserves all the success he has. And like I'm the old guy that he met at work. And my first hockey game doing live rinkside, the guy I called for advice was Kyle. Like, and he's just such a great kid. And he's not even a kid anymore; he's getting older.
Yeah.
But you have to let people know what you want. And as Oprah often says, ask. Like,
Yeah.
ask. Don't be shy. And that applies to hockey. That applies to everything for me.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree.
let people know.
I agree, and I bet you Kyle also showed up. I mean, that's one thing to ask, and that's come up in interviews here before. I mean, one particularly I remember with Brad Larson, assistant
Yeah.
coach of the Blue Jackets. He's like, players ask now, and they want to know why, and you'll give them an answer. And he's like, it's amazing that even at the NHL level, a lot of guys won't follow through with what they're supposed to do afterwards.
Yeah. That's just
So
it. Yeah.
that's the loop. Right? You got to close the loop, right? It's one thing to ask, which is hard enough. People are sometimes, shy. They're embarrassed. They're wondering about the judgment, so they don't even get there. But once you get there and you have the confidence to ask the question, make sure you follow through on what you're supposed to do.
Right. That advice is a gift, right? Like, I'll never forget when I was a videographer, I did a story on marmots at the Calgary Zoo. But I'd only been in Calgary for 6, 7 months. I didn't call them marmots. I called them marmots with my maritime accent. The whole newsroom's busting up laughing when the story's on the air. And I said, "What's so funny?" They say, "Can he say marmots?" Marmot, marmot. And so then like, you have to work on your accent. So I worked on my accent. Now, if I didn't work on my accent, but I still have gotten wherever I am, maybe not. But like you said,
Right.
if if Coach Larson gives a guy advice, take it, man. Take
Yeah.
it. And the other thing is, if that advice kind of goes against your dream, and well, I wanted to be a sniper in the NHL. Well, you got to work on your two-way game. Work on it, because maybe you're not going to make it there as a sniper. For me, I always wanted to be a play-by-play guy, right? But I'm an anchor now, but I'm still part of the deal, right? I'm not a sniper, but I'm still on the team, right? So there's different ways to break
Yeah.
in. Your dream can still be your dream. You might just have to alter it a little.
Sure. What I found compelling too is when you were talking there, you said you were anxious. You said you were, I think the word you used was depressed. You said
No,
you were
yeah,
an introvert.
yeah.
How, and I think that it is the how, if you're willing to get into it a little bit, like how did you overcome that and grow into somebody that feels comfortable on camera and isn't worried about
Mhm.
what people think, or at
Yeah,
least isn't as worried as what people think?
as worried, yeah. So it was one of those things, right? When a lot of people try to be a sportscaster, they try to be a sportscaster. But the secret is to be yourself and just figure out who you are on camera, which sounds easy, but it leaves you in the most vulnerable position because when people criticize you, they're actually criticizing you. They're not criticizing you as pretending to be Ron Burgundy, right? So you get your reps and you got to believe in yourself. So the more you do it, the better you get. It's like learning how to skate, right? The more you skate, the better you get. And I remember covered the first Flames game I covered. I'm afraid of heights, or was afraid of heights. And I don't know if you've ever been, if you're ever a healthy scratch in Calgary and you do that walk out on the old rickety catwalk and you go, it's awesome, right? It's the old school. It's what a press box should be. It's like at Rexall Place was. You're looking right out over the ice. You're not way back, and it's creaky, and you gotta, it's like crawling on scaffolding. And I just said, I have to do this. I have to be in the press box. So I did it. And being on camera was something I enjoyed. So that extroverted part of me came out. And I remember, I can tell you exactly the day it happened where I was like, okay, I think I can speak publicly and stuff. So grade 7, 8, I was like, I would win the school public speaking. I would go to the Pictou County thing. I remember in grade 6, I actually did my speech on meeting the Edmonton Oilers. And I was beaten out in the Pictou County finals by a girl who spoke about the spruce budworm. Anyway, I digress. So fast forward, I become this introvert through high school, and grade 12, I emceed the Pictou Academy Carnival Queen contest or something like that, and I actually did a good job. And I just riffed. I just went off the seat of my pants, and everybody was like, "Whoa, Kenny did this, Kenny did that," and I thought, okay, that's validation for that I can at least speak into a microphone. Because again, going back to your intentions, at the start of grade 12, the school picks a reporting team that speaks on the radio once every couple of weeks, does the high school report. I wanted to do it. I didn't tell anyone I wanted to do it. So of course I wasn't selected because no one knew I wanted to do it. So then I was ticked off. I didn't get it, but how is anyone supposed to know a little shy Kenny who doesn't talk is supposed to do it? So I remember my buddy Scott Landry got to do it. And I was like, oh man, I wish I was doing that. But hey, I didn't tell anyone. So ended up doing this pageant, realized I could speak on a mic. First day university, go to the campus radio station. You guys do sports? Actually, the first day it was closed. Go back the second day. Where's the sports director? Oh, it's this guy right here. I'll never forget. Dude was laying on the couch. I'm like, I'd like to help with sports. He's like, what sports you like? I'm like, oh, from Nova Scotia, I love hockey. He's like, you want to do hockey? The guy from hockey left last year. I'm like, yes. So again, let people know what you want to do. And then as soon as I got on the microphone, it took me a while. It took me years to figure out who exactly I was, but that happens. And now it's like, I talk to this camera the same way I talk to my camera in studio, the same way I'd talk to you over a beer. And and you know what? People are either going to like you or they're not going to like you. So whatever. And at least if they don't like me now or they like me now, it's on my own merits. And, people are like, oh, you got beady eyes and pale skin. I'm like, yes, I do, actually. And there's not much I can do about it. I also have a receding hairline if you really want to know the truth. But hey, it is what it is. So I enjoy it. I like being myself. I like being nice to people. I hate analytics. That's the only place I can tick people off at. Went on an analytics rant yesterday because of the Tampa Bay game, but yeah, just learning to be yourself on camera. It takes time, but I think again akin to a player breaking into the pros. What kind of player are you? Who are you? You might think you're a goal scorer. Well, you might be a defensive forward. You might think you're Paul Coffey. You might be, I don't know, Brad McCrimmon back there. You might be Mr. Stay at Home. I don't know. So, but once you find out who you are, it's a lot easier.
Yeah. And do you find yourself trying to, or at least maybe there's some younger people coming up now, like trying to put themselves in a box, like who they are supposed to be, as opposed to who they are? Because I assume my wife was in acting in LA, and these conversations that you're sharing right now is really what she had to figure out too, is not necessarily trying to be what she thought she was supposed to be, but just kind of be who she was. But I mean, it's such a in your face profession, right? Like you're
Yeah.
seeing people who are on air, what they look like, what they're doing, you know, like, and it's a bit of a copycat industry, I find,
Mhm.
in some stretches of the
Yeah.
imagination. So,
Yeah.
was that a
Absolutely.
challenge to figure that?
Yeah, to figure out who you are. I mean, I love Ron McLean. He's like my broadcasting hero. I can't try and be Ron. I mean, Ron is the smartest guy I know. He remembers everybody's name. And when I say everybody's name, I'm not talking about players. I'm talking about the mayor of Port Hawkesbury, Nova Scotia, and he meets their wife and their kids, and Ron remembers it. He's got a photographic memory. I'm not a names guy. I can't do that. So don't try and do that. This whole writing thing I stumbled into. It was funny. I did an interview about this book, and some guy goes, "Are you cool kind of being pigeonholed as this guy that writes books with short stories about ex players?" And I'm like, "Geez, what's it called when you a typecast?" I'm like, "Am I typecast as that guy?" And I kind of thought, I guess I am, because I never thought I'd get in.
Yeah.
Like, is Sean William Scott really disappointed that people associate him with Stifler? And he's not. If people yell Stifler to him, he's like, "Hey, what's up?" Because it's better than not having your stuff out there at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I and it's funny too, when I look back at all the different broadcasters I've worked with, and you mentioned it's a copycat industry, and it is. I think a little bit from here, a little bit from here, a little bit from here, a little bit from here. And I was always a goofball. And then when I arrive on the national scene, I'm a goofball, and people are like, "Oh, you're like this guy because he was here before you." And I'm like, "Well, if you actually go back and look at my old tapes, I've been a goofball for quite a long time." So yeah, it takes a while to figure out who you are, but you can take a little bit from people if that's part of you. But it's funny, it's that old fake it till you make it thing. I don't necessarily believe that, because if you're fake in my industry, you won't last. You can hang on for a bit, but if you're fake, you'll be exposed. Because one night the teleprompter will go down, and you'll have to do a whole show without it, which has happened. Um, I mean, if you want to see it just like a Picasso at work, go sit to the side and watch Ron McLean host Hockey Night in Canada, or go watch Jim Houston do play by play, or it's there's a lot going on that people don't see at home, right? Like,
For sure.
and it's yeah, like we have these things in our ears all show long with people talking as we're talking. I'm not like it's not open heart surgery. Let's not kid ourselves, but it's a great gig, and once you figure out who you are, it's an even better gig. And I'll tell you this too, because when you are climbing up, and I'll say this, when I started, I'm like, okay, I have to have a clean sportscast. I can't flub a word. I can't flub a word. I have to do this, and you're concentrating so hard, right? It's like you're over trying. Like, I can't make a mistake on the ice. What happens when you play like that, right? You're gonna make mistakes. But then as you get a little older, you realize, well, I am gonna make mistakes. So you just do your best, and then you learn to recover from those mistakes better, right? So that becomes a factor. So now, like, I used to be done of a story, and I'd wait for it to come on the air, and I'd watch it going, okay, I hope I say this right. I hope I say this right. I hope I say this right. I don't mean this in the wrong way, but I don't watch myself on TV anymore, because first off, I don't really like it. And secondly, I'm confident in what I did. And if I made a mistake, I didn't mean it. Craig Button gave me this advice one night. We were doing NHL on the fly, and I screwed up, and I was really mad at myself. He said, "You made a mistake." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you mean to?" I said, "No." He goes, "Well, then move on." And that's kind of how you gotta go about it, because I think as a broadcaster you will make mistakes, as a player you'll make mistakes, and if the sooner and the better you learn how to live with and handle those mistakes and recover from them, the more peace of mind it will give you, and your heartbeat will slow down a little, and you'll be better off.
Yeah, 100%. As long as you start learning from them too, and you're in an
Mhm.
environment where the mistakes are somewhat allowed,
Good
because
point. Good
we
point.
we've always been in those scenarios where you feel that the first time you drop the ball, you're gone,
What's
and
that like to play for a coach, and you're going, if I screw up one thing, I'm dead. Like, I'm nailed to the bench. That can't be good.
no, it's
You
hard.
know?
It's
Yeah,
hard.
I've worked for people like that, and it's hard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're a product of the environment a little bit, but I mean, of course, the environment is the environment. You got to overcome that too. But I do
Yeah.
think framing mistakes, how you just said, is not necessarily a mistake, and either not learning opportunity or something that's just going to happen. Like, you're allowing yourself to do that, frees you up in whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's broadcasting or setting up a power play. So
Yeah.
so now you're on Sportsnet. I would assume that's one of the taller mountains you could be on now in what you're doing. How do you get there? Is that you get picked from a bunch? Is that a tryout process, like akin
Yeah.
to a training camp, or how does that
Yeah.
run?
So I had sent tapes into both the TSN, the other place, and Sportsnet for years, right? So, and you hound them. You're just calling and you're pestering, which is not fun. Again, let your intentions be known. Rarely are they just going to call you out of the blue, right? It's not like in Anchorman where they say there's talent scouts and they go over and the guy's got his binoculars watching Ron Burgundy. I mean, they know you're out there, but you got to let them know. Like, do they know you really want to move from Edmonton to Toronto or Calgary to Toronto? So I pestered and sent tapes for years to both TSN and Sportsnet, and I got nowhere with Sportsnet for a long time. I just wasn't on the radar. So then I concentrated on the other one, and I got an audition at TSN in 2000. No, I got a call from them. The first time I got a call for them was, I want to say like 2000 and when did I move to 2004, 2005. But my buddy Brian Mudrick ended up getting the gig, and so I moved to Edmonton to replace Brian. So Edmonton was really good. CFRN was this feeder station for TSN and Sportsnet. Ryan Rashog worked there. Tasha Stanishevsky ended up working there. A bunch of guys worked there. So I was there, and then when I was there, I got a call from TSN, and they flew me in for an audition. And I think I was pretty much set to get hired, but then this hiring freeze came in. We're talking the recession in 2008, and that's when I made the decision to quit and follow wifey to Toronto. So when I got to Toronto, again, no gig, call them up, pester. They said, you can be what did they call it? Field producer, which basically meant I went to Leafs practice, held the mic for the cameraman, asked questions, didn't appear on camera. So I did that, and I worked at CP.40 as a sports guy here in Toronto. Eventually, they let me do reports for TSN. And then I got a job voicing highlights for In Arena for the NHL Network. So they shared studios with TSN. So I would do the highlights of the St. Louis Blues, Nashville Predators first period, and they'd beam it off to whatever arena. One night they needed a guy to do NHL on the fly because David Amber couldn't do it and Brian Duff couldn't do it. So I do that, did all right. Next thing I know, I'm the on the fly third wheel guy. At the same time, the Olympics rolled around. I'd been given an opportunity to be on air. And the only reason I'd been given an opportunity to be on air at TSN was we were going to Leafs practice and something broke and they needed a story on it. And they called and they said, Ken, you got a tie? I go, don't got a tie, but I'm in a suit. So we stopped at Sears, bought a tie, and I did a story. Apparently it was good enough. So then I'm a freelance on air guy at TSN. And then they needed an anchor one weekend. So I'm anchoring as well. So I'm anchoring there and I'm anchoring in NHL on the fly. And I wanted a contract. So I freelanced for a year, couldn't get a contract, literally called up Sportsnet, went in and met with them. And a week later I had a contract there. So I had to let my intentions be known. Yeah. Like just like you said, I had to tell people what I wanted, which is, as you know, it can be awkward, right? It's awkward to pump your own tires. But I mean, I'm sure when kids go in on draft day and they do the old combine interviews, it's a little odd. What kind of player are you? What can you bring to our team? That's tough to pump your own tires. But at some points in your life, you do. You have to do that.
Yeah. I remember one which doesn't make me look very good now with the way my career turned out, but it was draft day, and it was Winnipeg was the second last interview that I had, the Jets.
Yeah.
And it had been a rough day for me in a lot of accounts because Brian Maxwell was my coach at the time, and I had a relatively rough draft year. Like, there was some crazy stuff, couldn't get on the ice a lot of times, and so I didn't know why there was a rift, but there was something that was happening between me and my coach that these other teams knew about, and there was definitely people that were pro Brian Maxwell teams, and there was teams that were anti Brian Maxwell teams.
Wow.
And so when I walked into these meetings, the people that were pro Brian Maxwell, would essentially just rip me to shreds for, 20 minutes, and then I'd be on my merry way. And it was so it was an odd scenario, right? Like walking in and not really knowing what environment I was going to be in. And by the end of it, I was kind of getting a little pissy, to be honest, right? Because I was like, this isn't that fun. And I was I was trying to be gracious and, just trying to be honest and trying to be, who I am. And then I started to get a little irritated. And then so I walk into Winnipeg and they're kind of giving me the raspberries again. They're like, why should we take you with our first pick? And I was like, because I'm going to be the best damn forward in this draft. That's why you should. And kind of went on that stance. And anyways, obviously I never turned out to be the best forward of that draft, but it kind of felt liberating to say that though, right? Just to be like, Yeah, that's
You
why,
felt that.
and
You felt that. Like, I,
yeah,
you know what? It's so crazy to me when I think of what you had to go through with the interview process with the 21 teams then, or 24, whatever the hell it was.
yeah,
As an 18-year-old kid, if you get to go for a job interview at Sobeys, you're intimidated. Now, can you imagine? Like, this is again that people don't consider about what you guys go through. So people think back to their first job interview when they're 17, 18, they think, wow, that was intimidating. Well, imagine being in your shoes and you go in and it's first, it's every NHL team. And secondly, it's guys that you know. It's Mike Milbury, for God's sakes. It's, I don't know, Doug Wilson. It's whomever. It's Brian Burke. That had to be just, I don't know how you guys do it. It had to be crazy. It had to
no, it
be
is
nuts.
tough. And looking back now too, uh, like there was zero prep for that.
Really? The
Like
agents weren't giving
none.
you
I
anything?
mean, I had one of the best agents in the game, right? Like Mike Barnett, he's one of the biggest guys. There was zero prep work as far as like what to do, like no reps,
But that's what
no,
you're doing
no.
now, right? You're helping guys with this part of the game and
Well,
stuff like
that would, yeah. I mean, I haven't helped a guy with the draft interview process yet, but I mean, that would be something 100%
that.
that would be on my radar. Is like, hey, this is the process. Let's get in a roundtable thing. I'm going to fire you questions, so
Yeah,
you're prepared and ready.
yeah,
Yeah, it was a tough environment for sure. And like I said, an 18-year-old kid
wow.
surrounded sometimes like it's such a hostile environment, whether they're nice to you or not, but like you're sitting on a stool or a chair and you're surrounded a lot of times in a horseshoe by
Yeah,
men, you know what I mean? And they're
like
like
12
firing
suits.
questions at you. And it's like,
Oh my god.
yeah,
I would just crumble. I wouldn't know what to do in a situation like that, man. That's that's wild. That is like, these are the things, right? And that's kind of why I write these books is I want to take people off the just the on the ice thing. I want to show them all this other stuff that guys have to go through.
Mhm.
Because 90% of fans, 99% of fans, maybe 99.9% of fans, all we see is the game on TV on Saturday night. We don't see what goes into that, and the gut churning and the anxiety of am I going to stick with the team? Am I going to get sent down? Oh my God, I got called up. I'm on the fourth line. What do I do? I'm not getting any ice time. How do I make an impression? So that's what I like to show in these books.
Yeah.
Um,
No, and you do a
because
great job with it too.
there's so much more that goes into it than just being on Hockey Database, right? With your stats and things like that. Like like the stuff you told me, like, and the stuff people go through. It's just, and that's why I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, because there's just like I can't imagine like when you went to Toronto, like you said, you just show up and you're like, okay, practice is tomorrow. What do I do? Like, it's just crazy what guys go
Yeah.
through.
There's
Yeah.
no handbook, that's for sure.
No, no,
You're
no.
figuring it out. You're young. And yeah, I mean, I want to talk about the books. I mean, geez, that's number 6 now, I think, right? For you, like
Yeah,
the one
I
to
know,
remember.
eh?
So that's
That's why I wore the glasses for you. I wanted to come off as smart.
sweet. And I want to get there, but I want to one more
Oh
Sportsnet
yeah, take
question,
your
just
time.
because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm I'm curious about the industry, and I try to, which I've said here before, I do a little bit of research for these, but I really like to be as curious as I can so I can just ask questions and
good.
be authentic with what I'm asking. And the next one is Ivanka Osmak. So you guys
Yeah,
are on air together. Seems like you got some great synergy there. Uh, I mean, that seems like a natural progression to like a line combination or a defensive pairing,
yeah,
right? Some people
yeah,
work, some people don't. How does that happen in your industry to see who works together
yeah,
and yeah, and if there is kind of like the kingpin that's going to be there, and then you have to find their partner, or
yeah.
is it like you pair it up and you find two people that work well together, or how does that happen?
It was as simple as when was hired, they needed someone to co-anchor the weekends with Ivanka. It was as simple as that, and they threw me in there. And it is just like if they threw you on a line with somebody and you click. You know what it's like. You get out there and you're like, "Whoa, this is working." And for Ivanka and I, that was just what it was like. It was like, "Oh, this is good. She knows where I'm going up the ice, and I make a little drop pass, and oh my goodness, she's there. I fall down." And in our case, it's a lot of I fall down, but she's got my back, right? She's supporting the puck, as the modern players would say, or whatever the
Okay.
heck phrase they use.
So she's a natural. You think she's amazing at what
Uh,
she does?
yeah, she's smart. She's like a trained engineer, and she's a person that worked for 2 years as an actual engineer. And again, kind of what we talked about at the start, kind of said, "What am I doing? I don't want to do this," and took a 180 and became a sportscaster. Like, that's something to tell your parents after you go to university and study whatever the heck engineers study, right? And it's funny, we talk about what we took in school, and she's like, I'm like, I took methods of teaching and coaching baseball in philosophy classes. Like, like you should really do it all over again. But yeah, it's just one of those things where, yeah, like good management is like a good coach. They'll try to pair you up with somebody who works, but we just clicked, and that doesn't always happen. Um, but it did in our case. So it's very, very similar to clicking with a line mate. I'd say little to no difference at all, except no one's going to cross check you. That's about it.
Yeah, right. That's
Yeah.
true. They and the fact that Ivanka is obviously a female in a male, well, less male dominated, but
Yeah.
there is a heck of a lot more women that are on the air now,
Hmm.
and which is obviously greater diversity. And diversity has been such a topic, in recent months. It's kind of been bubbling for a long time. Do you like? I know you can't directly relate, but how would it have been for Ivanka, like coming up as a female in this sport? Is it even harder, or is it easier in
So
some weird way?
it's funny. Like she'll tell you, and I don't want to speak for her, but she laughs because she'll get all these people wanting to do stories. What was it like to break in? She's like, it was fine. Like she doesn't. It never had a big roadblock appear in front of her.
Right.
I think for uh, it's tough. Look, this is a tough industry to get into. And when she says it's fine, she didn't mention she had to go to Orillia, Ontario, and work radio promotions and drive around. Then she had to go to Yuma, Arizona, and work for Peanuts for a couple of years. And she had to send in audition tapes to Toronto, and eventually make her way to Toronto. It's a grind. So I think for me, um, I can only speak for myself, and for me it was fine, but it was still a grind.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid dreaming of being on Hockey Night in Canada, I didn't envision myself having to change the sign in front of Access Cable in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia during a snowstorm at -10 up on a ladder, putting those old, bingo cards up on the sign. But you do what you got to do. So for me, like I said earlier, I looked at it as 2 years of grad school, and you can either look at it as the grind, or you can look at it as something that you're going to learn from and look back from, hopefully with good intentions. I'm sure Alexander Burrows, when he showed up in the East Coast League, he wasn't thrilled, but now he looks back at it after the great career he had, and it was part of the grind, but it was also part of the experience that got him there. So just speaking for myself, there were days when I thought I'd never get out of Channel 10. There were days when I thought I'm never going to make a living at this. What else am I going to do for a living? And I think a lot of people in our industry go through that. And I think those who just keep grinding it out, most of the time they're the ones who persevere, because there's very few of us who just show up and appear on TV. It looks like that. It's like hockey, right? Where'd
Right.
this guy come from? He's awesome. Well, he had to play in the minors for 2 years. He had to play junior for 3 different teams in the O, right? You don't see that until you
I was
flip
just
the back
wondering,
of
though,
hockey card over.
yeah, kind of why I brought that up is because I'm wondering if for all the female listeners of this program, if that is a good avenue, meaning I would assume that and my assumption could be completely wrong, but I would assume there's more white males that want to do that gig than there is
Yeah,
females,
I'd
so
say
like,
that's true.
and,
Yeah,
and,
maybe, I
and,
don't know, but
and these
yeah,
stations want to increase diversity, I would assume,
yeah.
right? Like they like that. And so to get into something like that, it might be an advantageous time to try and, to try and get in. But I mean,
It could be. What I tell people is, I just do the best you can. If you do the best you can, and the best you can be is to be in another market, that's cool. If you do the best you can and you end up on Sportsnet, that's cool. Just because you want to go into sports broadcasting doesn't mean you're going to get a job. Just because you want to play in the NHL doesn't mean you're going to play in the NHL. It kind of goes back to, again, what we said before we came on. Use it for everything you can get.
yeah,
So for me, my hockey, the highest I got to play was midget C in high school hockey, man, and I loved it. If I would have stayed the rest of my life in Calgary at 8 Channel, I loved it. If that was my peak, that was my peak. For me, I guess that wasn't my peak. I'm here now. This is where I want to be. For other people, their peak might be a small town, and they might find great joy in that, and that's fantastic too. Or it might be a big city, or it might be a national network. So
yeah.
there's all different kinds of tiers, and usually you end up where you're supposed to end up, I find.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'll quote Kevin Weeks, previous guest on here, who's an NHL analyst now, and former NHL goaltender, a former teammate of mine, and he speaks very eloquently about diversity and much more eloquently than myself. But
Yeah.
I think he succinctly summarized it as saying, "Let's put the best people in the room." Period.
Thank you, Weeksy. Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that speaks to what you're saying there too. Do the best you can.
yeah,
Let's put the best people in the room. Black, white, brown, male, female, doesn't matter, right? And that's who should be on the biggest stages, right? And playing
yeah.
the biggest games. And I think that's a pretty cool way to put it. And I think that we are getting there. I mean,
I
it
think
seems
we
like
are.
we're
It's
starting
a
to move
ways.
that way.
It's a grind.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my favorite Weeksy story. So that year I was anchoring NHL on the fly a few times. I think it was my second night, and they're like, "You got to work with Kevin Weeks." I'm like, "Oh my God, Weeksy appears to be such a nice guy. I'd never met him." So I texted Colin White. Remember Colin used to play for
Mhm.
the Devils? He's a buddy of mine. My brother, there's Johnny Sim, who used to play with Colin growing up. And so
Oh,
my brother played with Colin and Johnny and Derek Walser and all those guys.
yeah.
So I go, I gotta work with Kevin Weeks tonight. Any advice? And Colin just texts back quickly. He said, "Watch how much he'll always be eating." Watch, and so I went in, and sure, Weeks he's eating, and I'm like, I just got to talk to Colin White. He said, "You're gonna be eating all night." He's like, "Oh yeah," and Weeks every break, Weeks he's eating. So he was, man, I love that guy. He was so much fun to work with, and he's a kind of guy who makes you smile when you walk into a room. Those are my favorite guys, and talk about having your back, right? Like I'm doing NHL on the fly for the first time, and NHL on the fly, for those of you who remembered on the NHL Network, it was truly on the fly. There was no lineup. There was nothing. You come on at 8 o'clock and you go and you talk hockey. So you better know your stuff. You better do your research. Man, he was my safety net a lot of nights. He was a wonderful guy to work with.
Yeah, he's
Wonderful guy
great
to
at what
work
he
with.
does. And I think,
Oh, is he ever? Is he ever?
yeah, I think there's bigger things ahead for him. I know he wants to get involved in the game, back in the game, like
Oh,
as
really?
far as from a
Okay.
team organization standpoint. And
Oh, yeah.
I know
He'd
he's
be
on
all
some
right.
teams' radars. And I think he was even up for the GM job for Florida. So I think he's,
Yeah, I read that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
He'd be great. Yeah, he's a good
would
dude.
be. I think he would be really great at it. What is it? One more journalism question, and you talked about
Sure.
journalism ethics. I'm not really sure if that's where this is going, or maybe it is, but it seems like a tough spot to be in doing what you're doing now, with what happened with charity. And you can go down and down the line of, if you misspeak or if you say maybe an opinion that isn't quite the popular belief right now, that there's this term been called cancel culture that kind of
Mm,
seems to be happening. Which almost also seems, which maybe is a second segue, part of this question, is like why things like these podcasts seem to maybe be getting more steam and more attention, because you're getting people actually saying what it is they want to. Do you
mhm.
find it, like? Do you ever think about that before going on air? That geez, like
Yeah.
this is trouble, potentially trouble.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you have to be careful. I'll be honest. And on podcasts, you have to be careful, right? Because a lot of people get on podcasts and they think, "Oh, okay, it's just a podcast." Well, I got news for you. You got a microphone right in front of you. I got a microphone right here. It's being broadcast, and it'll end up wherever it has to end up. So you have to be careful. People always say to me, how come you have you never sworn on air? I'm like, well, because I swear a lot. If you talk to me, I'll let them fly, especially in the dressing room post game, couple pops. I'll swear, but I've never sworn on air, knock on wood or IKEA glass. But you have to be
Mhm.
aware. We live in a time where if anybody wants to criticize you or call you out on something, you're a tweet away. So just behave, be nice. If you behave and be nice, I don't think you'll get into trouble. If you do get into trouble and you're sincere about it, acknowledge it. I never in my life went on the air with the intention to get into trouble. I won't. When I walk down the street, I don't try to offend anyone. So when I'm on TV, I don't try to offend anyone. Same thing. Just behave
Yeah,
like there's always, and you're on that camera and you're going to slip up. You're going to make mistakes, but as long as it's not malicious, I don't think. And I mean, there's a, like, honestly, when you're doing a show and you're dealing with sensitive topics, I always want to make sure that I'm referring to people or groups in the way they want to be referred to, not how. So it's sensitive, but I recognize that there are some sensitive people out there. So you do your best, and like, honestly, all you can do is do your best. And I'm a pretty sincere guy, so if I come off that way, and if I did make a mistake, I hope people would forgive me because it would never be intentional.
Right. Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. I mean, just be kind, be empathetic, do the best you
Yeah,
can. I just hope that it doesn't get to a spot where everyone's saying the same thing.
that's
Like
very true.
that,
That's very true. For me, like freedom of
because
speech
that's
is
not
such a
that's
good
not
thing.
real, right?
So get this. So here it again. Everyone's freaking out today because Jack Nicklaus endorsed Donald Trump and he put a big message on Twitter endorsing Donald Trump. Me personally, I would never vote for Donald Trump, but it's Jack Nicklaus. He has every right to. Does that mean he's a horrible person? No, it doesn't mean he's a horrible person. It just means he differs from me that way. And we're at the point now where if you have a different opinion, you're a horrible person. That's not true. Like yesterday, I sent out a couple tweets about analytics in baseball. I'm not an analytics fan. And if you're an analytics fan, that's fine. I have great friends who are analytics fans. I'm not an analytics fan. But then someone gets on Twitter and says, "You're a moron. You suck." I'm like, "No, I'm not. And neither are you." And social media has made it so we're all in such a rush to be right. And you have opinions. I have opinions. It doesn't mean they're correct. They're just our opinions. And it's just, we live in this world where we're yelling at each other and screaming at each other. Jack Nicklaus has every right to vote for Donald Trump. I have every right to disagree with him. But it doesn't mean, Jack, you suck, you moron. And if my political leanings or analytic stance go the other way, it doesn't mean, Kenny, you suck, you moron. I'd like to see our society get away from just hating each other because our opinions differ. Because aren't different opinions? Isn't that what make the world go around? Like, what if we had a sports debate show and everyone just said, "Yep, he's the best guy ever. He's the best guy ever. Topic two, second best guy ever. That guy, that guy." It's no fun, right? And but do it in a civil way, a civil way, please,
Yeah,
please.
I
That's
agree.
what I would beg of society at this point.
I totally agree. Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
I think the pendulum swung a little too far that one way. We're all just trying to figure it out, right? How
Oh,
this
I
works, how it
can't
comes
wait for
together.
it just to kind of, yeah, exactly. I'm with you. I'm with you on that
Yeah.
one. I guess we should agree on that, disagree on that, just to put a stamp on what we just said.
Oh, yeah. Why don't we get into the book? Because
Sure.
you and I got connected, I believe, from Terry Ryan, who's a
Yes,
mutual
sir.
friend of ours, and
Yep.
we're both fans of Terry. He's got a book out himself that's probably going to come on the podcast here. He's got an amazing hockey story to tell, and why not support him with his book? Uh, and yeah, so we got in touch. You got me in touch with Dennis Maruk. It's been an awesome connection to meet you. But then you reached out to me because I was one of the guys that scored one goal.
Yeah.
And ended up being included in your book, which here I got right here. Yeah, I know
Oh,
Ken's got in
nice.
the background there, but yeah, so there we go.
Sweet,
I'm
buddy.
into page 130. I haven't got through all the stories yet, but definitely have read the majority of them.
Did you read yours? Did you read your own yet?
You know what? It was funny because it wasn't the first one that I read, which you would think I probably would,
Nice.
but my mom had read it before me, and anyways, yeah, I have read it now.
Hope
But
it's accurate.
well, it better be.
Yeah, I know. I guess if it wasn't, I wouldn't be on here right now.
But let's talk about it. I mean, let's talk about first, maybe for those of you who aren't familiar, for those of my listeners who aren't familiar with your work, that you've done 6 books. The one previous to this was One Night Only.
Yeah,
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because this is
sure.
obviously seems like it's it's a connected to that one.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it goes back to what I said about being a dreamer, right? When I was 8 years old and wanting to play in the NHL, and when I realized I wasn't going to, I still dreamt about it, right? I never let that go. And to this day, I look, and it was again, we discussed about looking through hockey through the eyes of a 10-year-old. To this day, I really try to make a point to keep doing that. And I think for the most part I have, and that's what's led me to writing these books. I'm out in the backyard shooting on the net with my kid, and I'm still part of me thinking, it's game 7. Can I snipe? And so I always had the utmost respect for guys who made it, even for the smallest snippet of time. And Jason, there's a lot of people go, "Oh, look at that guy in the ice. He sucks, and he wasn't around for long." I got news for you, pal. He doesn't suck. He's way better than you, and what he's accomplished is incredible. So then I wrote this book, One Night Only, about guys who played a single game, and because I thought that was a great accomplishment. I wanted these guys to be respected, give them a little love, right? Not a lot of guys get a little love. So that book did really well, and what's better than one game? How about one goal? So turns out there's a lot of guys who scored one goal. There's around 400 or so. And of the 6,500 guys who played in the NHL, out non-goaltenders, 1,500 have never scored a goal. So I always thought scoring a goal in the NHL was cool, but then I thought, well, that's a damn cool accomplishment. And there's got to be some stories out there. So I go through the list, and there's some names I know, and the stories kind of, I'm like, there's something here. And I'm like you, I do a little research, but I want to remain curious. So I'm basically just flying out to see the pants when I interview guys. And I wanted to know what it's like to score just a single goal in the NHL. Is it enough? Is it a tease? Is it the small? Is it the culmination of your hockey journey? Is it a launching point? What does it mean? And to my surprise, I got a lot of different answers on what that meant. I've often said for me, I'd have a T-shirt that said I scored in the NHL, and I'd wear it every friggin' day. But I only scored a midget C. Probably popped about 25, I gotta say. But so I got a book out of it, man. Like what were you thinking when I called you? And like, hey, my name's Ken. I want to do a book on this. You're like, who's this freak?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question because there is a little bit of, I don't know what the right word is. You have to come to terms. Like, I mean, it made me come to terms again, right, with
Yeah,
what that was all about for me. And I know that
yeah,
chapter in there. I'm like I said, I read a lot of these guys' stories, and some of them are different, right? Some of the guys really never expected to be there. Some of them,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And got that goal, and it is something that's really near and dear to them. And then there's other guys like me, where it's like, man, I really feel like it was a letdown that it was
yeah,
only one. That
yeah,
my career should have been better. So for you to call and say, hey, do you want to talk about this? And then it's like, oh
yeah,
my gosh, now I have to put this down on words or like get this really formulated. So it was a challenge, and it
yeah,
was, being real and being honest, and, all those things that are great, and exercise in humility
yeah,
for me. And so, which I appreciated. And that's what I think. What I like about your stuff too is that it is about the person, right? There's a lot of player stuff in there, but it's about the person, and it's
yeah,
about kind of what they went through. Uh and yeah, so for me to share that, and for somebody to want to hear that story, I mean, it's the other thing is being grateful that, you know what, this guy wants to hear my story. That's
yeah.
cool. Why
And
not tell it?
I want, and when I did one night only, and the same as this one, I wanted guys to know that I'm doing it from the wow, you scored a goal as opposed to you scored a goal. Like so respect that. I hope that comes through to people. And I think when I talk to people, and you'd know better than me, I hope that comes through and with my questions, because for me, like I just want to, I I think I'm a nice guy. I think I'm positive, and I want people to know that this is a really special accomplishment. And I also want you guys to be able to. I'm sure there's a lot of this guys in this book, Jason, who probably only told this story to their friends and family, right, or their
Mhm.
local newspaper. So, yeah, I just wanted to give guys the respect they deserve. And I'm not calling to pump anybody's tires. There's guys who dealt with crap too, and you got to put that in there. But I think it's a pretty cool thing that you sniped a goal in the NHL.
No, it's
I'd like to do it.
and
You
even
know?
like what you said there, as far as like the 5,000 people in the history of the NHL have scored a goal in the NHL. Like, that's not
Yeah,
very many people.
1,500 didn't. Some
Yeah.
guys. Yeah, I mean, think about that. Think of how many people strapped on the blades or played ball hockey or road hockey in this country, and they've all had that dream when they're in the backyard. When they put that orange plastic ball that would knock your teeth out as a kid and
Yeah.
leave you deeply bruised in the 1980s, when they put that in the net, I guarantee at some point that went through their mind. Wow, I'm in the NHL and I just scored on, Tony Esposito or whoever it was back in the day,
Mhm.
and you guys actually did it. And I'm not, it's pretty great.
So
So I just wanted to show that.
cool. Yeah. And so, a question. So you had 400 names. I mean, a lot of them,
Yeah,
I'm sure, were from different eras, and I mean, many of them have died, I'm sure. Like, so you had, I guess, a cross section that you could choose from. Like, how did you go about even reaching out in the first place?
sure. So props to our Sportsnet stats guru, Steve Fellon, who immediately, I asked him, how many guys have scored a goal? And one goal. 10 minutes later, he's got the whole sheet printed out for me. So, as you know, I do my books from personal interviews, so the deceased couldn't be part of it. Also, what's interesting is the list grows but then shrinks, because if you get a goal one game and you get your first goal one game and you get your second 2 weeks later, you're off the list. So I concentrated obviously on the guys who are not in the NHL anymore. because if I call a rookie and he scores a goal a week later. So then I went down the list, and there were some names who jumped out to me. I saw Dave Hansen. I'm like, well, I got to get a Hansen brother in here, right? I saw Dennis Bonby, and I'm like, well, I got to get pro hockey's all-time penalty minutes leader in here. I saw Frank Beaton, who's a legend down in Nova Scotia. I got to get Frank in here. Frank never beaten, Frank seldom beaten, Frank always beaten, Frank time to retire beaten. And then you just kind of go down and you look at the names, and I come across a guy, and I do a little research, and this guy named Mike Forbes, and I'm like, okay, he's a club coach in Michigan, and he scored 1 goal for the 81 Oilers. I'm like, well, that was a stacked team. And I look up the summary for the game. I'm like, oh my God, this guy scored 1 goal in the NHL, and it was assisted by Gretzky and Curry. That's pretty cool. So I do my detective work and try to find him. And you know what the hockey world's like. I call a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. I stumbled upon your story, and I'm like, whoa, look at this guy. Oh my God, he traded for Muller. There's something going on there. TR, but and Harry gives me your number, so I call you. And some of the interesting ones were, I wanted some guys from the original 6 era, because obviously there's not many of those fellows with us anymore. And so I look up this fellow named Les Kozak, who scored, and happy birthday, Les. He turned 80 this week. And he scored a goal for the Leafs in 62. So I thought, okay. And then it just kind of disappears. So I'm trying to contact this guy named Les Kozak. But whenever I'm Googling Les Kozak, all I'm coming up with is Dr. Les Kozak from the Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, Maine, who's taught in university in Poland and lectured at Louisiana State University. He's the foremost scientist in this and this. I'm like, okay. I'm like, that's not him. So I go in, I come back a couple days later, and that is the Les Kozak who scored a goal for the Leafs in 62. And I'm like, how many guys in the NHL now, if they scored a single goal, are going to go on to become world-renowned scientists? So I'm like, there's a story there. I call up Les Kozak. All I know is he scored a goal for the Leafs in 62, and his career was over. He told me how he skipped out on his final year of junior at St. Mike's to enter a monastery and become a priest, missed out on winning the Memorial Cup, forgot about the priesthood, went back, signed with the Leafs, got called up after scoring 2 goals in Rochester on a Friday, scored his goal in his first game. 2 weeks later, got his head crushed in the boards on a body check, still has a golf ball size hole in his head, went on to become a scientist. I'm like, this is way more than 1 under the G column on Hockey Database. So there's all these things that just started jumping out to me. And I mean, you read the first story in the book about John English, if you're reading the book in order, and what happened to him with. Like, I didn't think I would be talking about a stabbing when I did this book, right? Like, I didn't.
After the game, right?
Oh my goodness! So just awesome, wild stuff. And I thought every guy I talked to would say, "Oh, it's the greatest moment of my life." I've got my puck over my fireplace. And it's not what happened, and that made the book pretty intriguing for me.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good read, really good read, and I recommend anyone going out there and listening, because I like the way you do it too. I mean, you can read 3 pages and you get through one guy and you put the book down and come back to it later, right? So
I'm no Shakespeare here. I know my lane. Again, it comes back to who you are as a broadcaster, who I am as a writer. My writing style is like, hopefully, like me and you are sitting there having a beer. You're telling me to it, and it's kind of putting a story form. And again, you can't compare yourself to other writers, right? Like my favorite writers are Stephen Brett and Jeff Pearlman. Their books are like that thick, but that's what they do, right? This is what I do. So you can still enjoy them, and I do. I love their writing. That's but awesome. Yeah, it's an easy read, right?
What maybe just a couple. Like, what was your favorite story of perseverance from that one? If somebody comes to mind, if someone just exemplified that trait.
Lee Sweat, healthy scratch in the KHL.
That's right. I read about him.
Yeah, undersized defenseman, healthy scratch, career's over, ends up getting a contract back in North America with the Canucks, works his way up to Vancouver and scores a goal, and next practice he breaks his foot, and it all, and now he's a money manager guy in Colorado. Lee Sweat was a good story of perseverance. Perseverance. I mean, Frank Beaton. Frank never thought he thought he'd play in the NHL as a goal scorer, right? As a kid. No. Has to scrap his way to the league. And Frank is 175 pounds. He's fighting the heavyweights, and he grinds his way to the New York Rangers, and he scores a goal for the Broadway Blue Shirts. And Frank's words at the end of the book, for me, it was like it was the perfect ending. So many guys in this book just were grinders and grinded it out. Like guys who never thought they'd make the league, like Rob Skurlak. I'm sure you and Rob crossed paths at some point
Yeah.
in the American League. And Rob was a guy who was pumped to get a tracksuit when he was playing in the Rocky Mountain Junior League, right? Like, oh my God, I got a team tracksuit. This is the best. Never thought he'd play in the NHL. Made it all the way to the NHL. He might have the best goals per minute rate in NHL history. I think he scores on average a goal per 47 seconds, something like that, if you break his numbers down. But what I loved about doing this was there were stories of perseverance, and there were stories of, guys, I'm sure like yourself, like you and Kimby Daniels, you guys racked up some points in junior, probably thought you were going to get more than one. And I think you told me as much. But yeah, there's guys in here like Joey Hishin, man. He's first round pick. I thought he'd score a ton when I was watching him in junior. He took that big hit in the Mem Cup that year. And then there's guys who, absolutely never thought they would. Then there's a guy like Darren Haydar. I'm sure you know Darren Haydar. He was a big time AHL scorer. If Darren played in this era, man, he'd be first, second line guy every night. So yeah, perseverance was a big part of it. But I also think that perseverance is when you're told that you're going to be the next big thing. Like Jason, in your shoes, I think you persevere because I'm sure it didn't, like when you're picked that high and you're scoring in junior, you probably think your first one is the first of many. But to keep going, to me, is perseverance as well, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, I appreciate that. It is. I mean, because you're doing. I think it's a different. I mean, it'd be interesting to do it again through, through the expectations of maybe somebody who is constantly striving to get to that next spot. Because
yes,
there's a whole different mindset difference, right? As opposed to somebody telling you that you are going to be in the NHL, or the pundit saying that you're going to be, and that's where then you think you're supposed to be, and then you're not there. Like expectations is a weird thing, right? For people, I think
it is interesting because what's harder? What's harder? Being told you're never going to be there and climbing it and trying to get there, or being told you're going to be there and not being there just yet? Like, what's the different challenge, right? That is a good question. That's your next podcast.
I love you bringing up Rob Skurlak, because we did play against him, and he was in Kamloops, and again, I mean, Skurley's a great guy. I mean, I don't know him personally, but I've heard he's
wonderful guy.
Yeah, tons of fun, and super humble, and first guy to laugh at himself, and and like that's a hilarious story, because like if you would have told me in junior that Rob Skurlak and I would tie for NHL goals, I would have laughed you out of a building, right? And there you go, right? Yeah. And I will tell you one funny story with Rob, because it's one of my best minor league stories. He was in Albany, and for those of us who know Rob, he has a pretty big bucket. He's got a pretty large head, and it was this. He always had this helmet. I didn't even know where they would find like the helmet that would fit him, right? And he was a big guy, and he was a big guy, and he was a fighter. But we were standing there for the anthem, and in the crowd, this fan had a sign that said, "What would you rather have, $1 million or Rob Skurlak's helmet full of nickels?"
Oh my God, that's a good one.
We were dying. It was like one of those ones that just like tattooed in my brain, that sign. We were just chuckling, everyone. Oh my goodness,
that's awesome. I love his story, because I love that a guy, and this is another thing that you want to write these books for, because again, these are things that don't show up in any stat line. A guy like Rob Skurlak and a guy like Al Nazardine, what they were meant to their respective organizations, because Rob was with the Devils for a long time in Albany, and everybody on the Devils, by the time they got to the NHL, knew who Rob was. So when Rob scored that goal, it meant so much, not only to him, but to everyone else in the room. And when Alan Nazardine scored his one goal for the Pittsburgh Penguins, he'd been in Wilkes-Barre for years, being a mentor to all these young guys coming up. It almost means more to the other guys in the room than it does to them. Like there's and that's one thing I love about hockey, is how much the guys just like, how much the success of another person means to them. I think that's a special thing, as opposed to some other sports where it's maybe it's a team sport, but maybe it's a little more individualistic.
Yeah. Or even other professions. right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's where the culture of it comes in. I mean, it's not always in hockey either, but sometimes you're in a spot that gets it, like,
Yeah.
and the unselfishness is real. That's special, and those teams are successful. And just like any corporation, big business, when you're actually in an environment that you care about each other and you're lifting each
Oh,
other
yeah.
up, there's success there. So
Yeah.
uh, I totally think that's relevant in all areas of life. That when we get outside of ourselves and start caring about other people, it
Oh,
makes it better.
absolutely, man. If you care for the other person, it shows in society today, right? If it's we,
Yeah,
not me, it's a lot better than me, not we.
I hear you.
That could lead
You're
us to a whole lot of conversations, but we
yeah,
won't go there.
you're I mean, you said it before. I mean, you think you're a nice guy. I mean, you are a nice guy, and I think
Well,
the way you write is relatable. I think you are relatable. Yet you're in a position where you're a celebrity in some aspects, right? Like, you're on TV. People who watch you see your face. I'm sure you walk down the street like an NHL guy, and people hey, that's Ken Reid. I'm sure you have more conversations with random people than my next door neighbor does. Let's say,
right, right, right.
how do you go about handling that?
Well, I always say, Jason, if you go to a celebrity golf tournament and you have to put a pin on that says celebrity and Ken Reid under it, you're not really that famous, right? I don't know. My wife's more paranoid about it than I am. Like, we walked by a kid the other day going down the street. And my wife said, the kid said, "Oh, that's Ken Reid." And I'm like, I guess I have to be careful about how I behave. But no, if people want to come up and talk sports, I'm thrilled to. The strangest place I got recognized recently was in the underwear section at Winners in Belleville, Ontario, while I was wearing a mask. Guy's like, "Ken Reid." I was like, "What?" He's like, "I recognize the voice." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Buying some getting some underwear." He was a nice guy, so we had a chat. But no, it's a thought. Look, people who say that it's not cool when somebody comes up to you and knows who you are and wants to talk to you, they say that's not cool. They're full of crap. It's flattering. It's an honor. So if people know me through my work, I consider that a blessing. So yeah, it's nice, but sometimes you got to remind yourself that even though people aren't coming up to you, they may know who you are. So, like the wife says,
Right.
no swearing. I curse a little bit. So you got to be careful around kids and stuff like that. Like, you can't road rage as much as you might want to, things like that. But again, the words of Audio Slave: to be yourself is all that you can do.
Does it
So,
make you more empathetic to the players that you're talking to because you've kind
oh
of
God, yeah.
experienced it on your own end?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd like to think that I'm pretty empathetic when I talk to players. Like, again, we're in this world where you have to draw a line in the sand. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's to blame? There was this classic old Kids in the Hall skit,
Mhm.
and it was the day of the softball tournament, and the boss was pumped, and he looked out the window, and it was thunder and lightning, and all he said was, "Who's to blame?" And he went around the office looking for who's to blame. And we're in a culture where you're either the hero or you're to blame. And I think it's a little more gray than that. So I think, yes, we should exercise some empathy. Nobody means to cough the puck up in the final game of the Stanley Cup final. Nobody means to make an error. It happens. So be empathetic. You know, but yeah, but when somebody comes up to you and they know who you are and they want to chat, that's very flattering for sure. But it doesn't happen as often as you might think.
Right. No, I got you. Yeah, I just think it's. I mean, my head goes to some of these stars now, and some of the stars of old, like Wayne Gretzky, who just always seemed to be on. Like,
Always,
always just
yeah.
seemed to be on, and always had a time, and could always create a moment, and yeah, I just you know
We're all
I
entitled to
revere
a
that
bad
guy,
day.
like, it's so cool. It's like and those are the examples, and I think when you're around it and you've seen it, obviously, right? You've seen
Yeah,
the guys that are good at it, and you've seen the
yeah.
guys that aren't, and when you have that model, I mean, you can step into that a little bit in your own way, I think, right?
Well, Mama always told me, be like Wayne Gretzky, humble and kind. So she still says that. She's like, don't get too high on yourself. But writing a book with Eddie Shack, that was awesome, because at book signings, or when Eddie and I were in public together, and it was usually at book signings, he always gave people a moment. And that's why Eddie Shack resonated with kids from 8 to 80. Eddie Shack, I'm convinced, during his old timers tours, he's played in every rink in Canada, and everybody has an Eddie Shack story. And Eddie gave people a moment, whether it was for 30 seconds or 30 minutes. And Eddie knew that when people came up to him at that book signing, he knew that they wanted just that little bit of Eddie Shack. So he gave it to, "How you doing? What's going on? Look at that hat on you." Like, he gave them something every time. It was never, "Oh, thanks for buying the book," and he signs the book. Eddie gave them that, and people left thrilled. And for Eddie to take the time to do that, and I'm no Eddie Shack, I'm not on that level, but if somebody wants to talk to me and I can give them a moment, I'm more than thrilled to. I'm happy to. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Well, I love the book, man.
Thanks, buddy.
I really appreciate you caring enough to, to even call
Well,
and
vice versa, buddy. Vice versa. I mean, you could have hung up on me when I called for an interview, right? If not for our good friend and that good reference of Terry Ryan,
yeah.
we'd be done.
Yeah.
But
So I
no.
mean, I hope it continues to do well. I'll definitely be pushing it here after and get people to go
Well,
out there and buy it. Great Christmas gift too, by the way.
yeah. Well, the other reason you do a book with 39 different players in, think about this: if those 39 players get 20 family and friends to buy that book, you're already at what, close to, I don't know, whatever math, 600 sales. I mean, that's just good math. That's good business, right?
That's right.
So, if everybody buys the book, you're in good. But yeah, this was a fun book to do, and this was that's a good conversation, man. We went a little deep. I like that.
No, yeah, that's the way we roll here at Up My Hockey. Try and
Good.
figure out. There's always connections too. I mean, I love that you're talking about intention. I love you're talking about being a good person, and we talked about caring about each other, like putting in the reps too. Like all
Yeah.
this stuff is
Yeah.
like so transfers like to the
Oh,
hockey players that are listening, right?
it
Like,
does it ever. Like the more
yeah,
I think about it, the reps, work at it, man. What's so funny, and this is our industry, and this is hockey as well. And I think I referred to it. You pop up on TV. Oh, where'd this guy come from? Why wasn't he here before? Because it took time. Why wasn't this guy on the team before? Because it took time. Right? Very few of us just show up and rock and roll from day number one, and you don't see that, and that's what I like to show in these books, and that's what I like to tell young broadcasters, and I'm sure it's what you like to tell young hockey players. It takes time. Everybody wants to show up and win Stanley Cup in their first year or play in the NHL in their first year. No offense to any AHL markets, but very few of us grow up dreaming to play in the East Coast League or the AHL. But it can still be a wonderful thing, I'm sure.
mhm.
Right? Playing midget C for me. I didn't grow up dreaming of playing midget C when I was 8. I wanted to play in the NHL. But man, playing midget C sure was fun. I had a
Yeah,
great time. Doesn't mean
yeah.
it's
Big dreams happen with big accountability, right?
ah
Like,
very nice.
a lot of people want to do it, is all I'm saying, right? But not many
Yeah.
people are prepared to do it.
Yeah,
Do what it
that's true.
takes. So,
That's true too. That's
yeah.
that's also true in my industry because in our industry, I mean, it's a grind, and you got to take that job you don't want. And a lot of people in our industry just don't want to take the job they don't want and go do something else, and that's fine too. That's fine too. Things change. It's not everything is for everyone, and just because you think something's for you, you might find out it's not, but it might open another door as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, look at me, what I'm doing right now. I mean,
Exactly. Did you
it
envision yourself doing this?
well, it's you know what? That's so I didn't even tie that knot, but what a great connection because, if I wasn't in your book, if I wasn't the guy who scored one goal,
Mm-hmm.
and I did have a 1,000-game NHL career, I probably wouldn't be behind a mic right now telling other people's stories and what it takes to get there and,
Sure.
all these kinds of things. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
amazing. I appreciate that, and that is a connection to what we're doing now, and maybe this was maybe more what I was meant to be than being that NHLer that we were talking about.
Exactly. Me too, right?
Yeah,
And I dreamed of being the play-by-play guy. I wasn't that.
yeah,
And I also think that, and I said it earlier, you kind of, after a while, I think you kind of fit into that where you're supposed to fit in. We spend a lot of our time, maybe in our 20s and 30s as well, trying to chase that one thing we think matters. But sometimes that one thing will lead us to be where we're supposed to be, right? I mean, I think that's a good way of looking at things because I mean, I never thought I'd be living in the East End of Toronto, and I with 2 kids in a brick house, but I'm happy to be here, man.
yeah,
That's what happened,
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you have been a great guest. I love the stories.
Thanks,
Very
Jason.
relatable, and I know the 39 stories in there. That it's worth it because there's going to be a couple that are going to move people too, right? Like there's definitely some stories in there that are really compelling, and
Yeah.
people will be able to connect with them for sure. So go out there and grab it. Support one of our locals, a Pictou native.
That's right, baby.
Yeah,
Pictou, Nova Scotia. But seriously, huge thanks to you and to all the 39 guys who took part in the book, because that's the thing. I mean, you don't make much money writing in Canada, but you guys all just took your time out of your hearts to do this. So there's no book without the guys in it. That's for sure.
My pleasure, sir. And with
Thanks,
that,
buddy.
we'll cut her off. Thanks again for being an amazing guest. And
Thanks, buddy.
next week we got Jerome McGinley. So you're before Jerome
Hey,
McGinley.
oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about Jerome. I'm interviewing him this Sunday, so he's going to be episode 41, so that'll be great.
Can you tell Jerome, before we go, one of my favorite hockey memories? So first off, I was covering the Flames and started covering the Flames in 2000, 2001. Iggy was maybe 23, whatever. So I got to see some great Jerome McGinley hockey.
Yeah.
One of my favorite memories was going to Father David Bauer Arena to cover the 2001 Olympic training camp. And Jerome McGinley is running in the rink. And he probably won't remember this. I was like, what are you doing here? And he said, they called me last night. And he had to drive down from Edmonton to Calgary because he was a last minute substitute for someone. Yeah. And that was the season. Jerome just went on a tear. That was his first 50 goal year, made the Olympics. And just tell him he won't remember me from Adam. But please tell Jerome what a class guy to cover. And he made everybody feel welcome at the Saddle Dome, which was a special thing to do, especially for media, because people may not realize you saw them strutting there at the All-Star game with their chests out going in to interview guys. There's a lot of guys who are nervous. And as a young guy, I was nervous. If I went down now, look, I wouldn't be nervous anymore because I'm an old guy. When I was 25, 26 years old, I was pretty nervous. And he made you feel like you belong. So I am a huge Jerome McGinley fan. So way to go, Jerome.
Yeah, he's tough not to be, and I'm sure I'll get into that on the next episode. But like, I was actually thinking about like in the prep work for him. And I mean, he's my peer, right? I played against him in Kamloops, so it's not like, you know, it's not like Mario Lemieux was for me. But when I look back on like what Jerome has accomplished, what he stood for, what he represented, as far as even being a Canadian player, like I just think he exemplifies the Canadian hockey player. That if I was the poster boy, you know, like he played hard, he played gritty, he was a good leader, he's a good person, he took care of others, he could score goals,
what a teammate. You know? He wore an XL7 in minor hockey, man. So did I. You know, like he would go when the team needed him to go. He didn't go for himself. And just man, what a career, and just what a great guy. And further proof, and I've said this forever, Jerome McGinley is further proof that there's no such thing as a bad person from St. Albert, Alberta. Everyone I've ever met from St. Albert is like the nicest person in the world. I don't know what it is about that place, but it produces good people.
Yeah, we're gonna get into the grassroots and everything. So, anyways, we'll save that for next time. But
thanks, buddy.
Excited to have him on. Excited to have you on. Thanks for spending your time with us today and sharing your stories. And till next time.
Thanks, Jason.
See you, Ken. Thank you so much again for being here with us today for episode 40 with Ken Reid. Ken, thanks so much if you're listening. Really enjoyed that conversation. I know there'll be more in the future between us. Always pleasant, always a good laugh and bring a smile to my face. For those of you who stuck with us to the end, really appreciate it. I mean, there's lessons, right? I mean, that was the thing that I kept, bringing out and hearing in the conversation is that, yes, we probably are directly associated to hockey if you're listening to this. You're a hockey player yourself, you're a hockey parent, or you're a coach, and we're wired that way. How do we perform? How do we get better? How do we get to where we want to go? Yet when we listen to a story like Ken's, the parallels are the same. And that's why it's good to get outside of your lane sometimes and to be interested in somebody else's story and somebody else's, trip to the top. And with Ken, right, we talked about intention and we talked about perseverance. We talked about saying yes, doing the things that maybe other people don't want to do while letting people around you know what your true intention is. And for Ken, that was his story. He took jobs, where maybe others wouldn't. He did things that maybe others wouldn't do, but he let people know along the way where he expected himself to get to. And when you're persistent and when you put in the reps, good things happen. I love the part about putting in the reps. Same thing for hockey players, put in the reps. If you're passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work. So if the passion is there, if the goal is there, put in the reps, make your intentions known, and people are going to get on your bandwagon. People are going to get on that train. They want to support dreams. Coaches do, teachers do, bosses do. Whatever line of work you're in, people like to support success. It's a human characteristic. So yeah, intentionality is really big, and following up with the accountability to be able to follow up on the actions required to get to where we want to go, what we say we want to do, really makes you authentic, and it makes you have a level of integrity that other guys and girls don't. So thanks again, Ken. I love the lessons there today. And till next time, which is, by the way, Jerome McGinley, play hard. Keep your head up.